Hi, my name is Brenda Thomas. My presentation today is African American soldiers and their roles during American wars. My thesis, African American soldiers played vital and significant roles in American wars that secured their names in history. Yes, African American soldiers have played significant roles in American history. I would like to share the stories of 9 such heroic military men and units. They are Patton's Panthers, the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Harlem Hellfighters, the Buffalo Soldiers, the Triple Nickel, the African American in Vietnam, the Wehrmacht 11, and the African American soldier in Desert Storm. Patton's Panthers were an all-black group of soldiers who fought for General George S. Patton. They were eager to go to war to dispute the myth of the day that blacks were afraid to fight. The Panthers would be highly decorated for their successful campaign. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion was a VLA, or Very Low Altitude Battalion, of black soldiers whose primary duty was as a deterrent against enemy planes. With their balloons tied to the ground by metal cables, the balloonists prevented planes from flying too low to the ground. The 320th would be decorated for their efforts in the war. The Tuskegee Airmen were an all-black bomber unit whose primary purpose during the war was as escorts. Their presence worked as a deterrent to enemy pilots. Their flying abilities established them as one of the most courageous and well-known aviation units in the war. The airmen received numerous awards for their contributions in the war. The Harlem Hellfighters were an all-black unit whose role during the war was to fight the war in France, and fight they would do continually for 6 months with little to no reinforcement. They would receive numerous decorations of honor. The Buffalo Soldiers were an all-black cavalry. They were called Buffalo Soldiers because of the color of their skin by Native Americans. His primary duty during war was to protect Allied Indian and settlers. They would serve in several successful campaigns in the Civil, Indian, and Spanish Wars. The Triple Nickel, named for their 555th emblem, were the first paratroopers in history. They would receive Secret Service orders known as Operation Firefly. They would become the first unit in military history to be smoke jumpers. During their first year, they would make over 1,200 jumps and control at least 28 fires. They also would be decorated for their efforts in the war. African Americans in Vietnam. The African American in Vietnam suffered high combat and heavy casualties. The African American soldier would account for 12.6% of the soldiers in Vietnam. Some of the enlistment would receive decorations for their service. The Wehrmacht 11 were named for the small town in Wehrmacht, Belgium, in which they were killed. There were a group of 11 soldiers attached to the 333rd Armored Battalion who would die a horrific death at the hands of German soldiers. Their names: Staff Sergeant Thomas J. Fort, Technician Edward W. Pritchett, Technician James A. Stewart, Corporal Major Bradley, PFC George Davis, PFC James Leatherwood, PFC George W. Moten, PFC Dewey W. Turner, Private Curtis Adams, Private Leroy Robert Green, and Private Nathaniel Moss. African Americans in Desert Storm was a different war for the African American soldier. It was swift, victorious, and popular. Desert Storm had more African Americans in leadership positions than any other war in history. I hope that I have honored these great African Americans who, while fighting a physical war with the enemy forces, at the same time were fighting the private hell of racism. Each unit made a contribution to the war. Each unit fought courageously. They were decorated men of color who fought with honor and pride to show while fighting that African American men were not afraid to fight and were capable of being trusted to fight alongside any and all fellow soldiers. It was my privilege to report on such great men. I found my research riveting, yet sad, but I felt it my responsibility to tell of these 6 unit stories, for their parts in the war to stay in our remembrance, for the courage they showed while in the American wars they fought. I wanted to show that the African American soldier could fight and did fight in the American wars, paving the ways for others. Their service and the sacrifice they gave while fighting should never be forgotten, but should always be cause enough for them to be in remembrance. For the great soldiers they were, who gave service to country with all odds stacked against them. In the end, there were soldiers who just happened to be African American. Thank you.